For most people, the sky represents freedom, safety, and distance from danger. When an aircraft lifts off the ground, it enters a vast, open space where collisions seem impossible, where miles of empty air separate one plane from another, and where human conflict feels far below. But history has proven that even the sky can become a battlefield of human error, technological limitation, and tragic coincidence. On a clear summer morning in 1956, over one of the most breathtaking natural wonders on Earth, the illusion of safety shattered forever. Two passenger airplanes, filled with families, children, business travelers, and dreamers, vanished from the sky without warning. No distress call, no time to react, no survivors. What happened that day above the Grand Canyon was not just an accident. It was the deadliest mid-air collision the world had ever seen, and a catastrophe so severe that it forced aviation to be rebuilt from the ground up. In the early 1950s, commercial aviation was entering what many called the golden age of flight. Air travel was becoming glamorous, accessible, and increasingly popular. Airlines competed fiercely, advertising speed, comfort, and scenic routes through the American sky. Aircraft like the Lockheed Constellation and the Douglas DC-7 were engineering marvels of their time, symbols of progress that promised to shrink continents and bring the world closer together. Yet beneath this optimism lay a dangerous truth. The skies were growing crowded faster than the systems designed to manage them. Air traffic control, as we know it today, barely existed. Radar coverage was limited, communication relied heavily on radio calls, and pilots were often given wide freedom to navigate visually, trusting their eyes and experience rather than precise tracking systems. On the morning of June 30, 1956, United Airlines Flight 718 prepared for departure from Los Angeles International Airport, bound for Chicago. The aircraft was a Douglas DC-7, one of the most advanced propeller-driven airliners of its era. On board were 53 passengers and 5 crew members, many of them families beginning summer vacations, unaware that this journey would be their last. Around the same time, Trans World Airlines Flight 2, a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, departed from Los Angeles on a nearly identical route toward Kansas City, carrying 64 passengers and 6 crew. Both flights were scheduled, routine, and unremarkable, until fate placed them on a deadly path toward each other. Weather that morning was nearly perfect. Clear skies stretched endlessly over the American Southwest, offering pilots stunning views of desert landscapes and the winding Colorado River far below. In an era before strict flight corridors, pilots often requested slight deviations from their assigned routes to provide passengers with scenic views, especially over landmarks like the Grand Canyon. Such requests were common and usually approved, relying on the assumption that the sky was vast enough to safely accommodate them. But this assumption ignored a growing danger. Multiple aircraft cruising at similar altitudes, speeds, and directions, all without real-time tracking or centralized coordination. United Flight 718 climbed steadily to its cruising altitude, while TWA Flight 2 followed a similar climb path, both aircraft moving eastward across Arizona. Air traffic controllers on the ground had limited information, relying on estimated positions rather than continuous radar data. Pilots communicated their intentions, but radio frequencies were often congested, messages overlapped, and confirmations were sometimes unclear. In this fragile system, a single misunderstanding could prove fatal, and on that morning, multiple small gaps aligned with catastrophic precision. As both aircraft approached the Grand Canyon, the pilots likely admired the spectacular view below. Massive red rock walls carved by time, shadows stretching deep into the canyon, the Colorado River glistening like a ribbon of silver. Passengers may have pressed their faces to the windows, cameras ready, unaware that another aircraft was approaching from the opposite direction at nearly 500 miles per hour. Neither crew could see the other in time. Without radar warnings, collision alerts, or automated systems, the only defense against disaster was human vision, and human vision failed. At approximately 10:31 a.m., at an altitude of about 21,000 feet, the two aircraft collided in midair above the Grand Canyon. The impact was violent beyond imagination. The left wing of the United DC-7 tore into the fuselage of the TWA Constellation, ripping both planes apart instantly. Debris exploded outward, scattering across the sky like shrapnel. One aircraft lost its tail section immediately, plunging downward in an uncontrollable spiral. The other disintegrated midair, its pieces falling silently toward the canyon floor below. There was no chance for a distress call, no opportunity for evasive action. In a single moment, 128 lives were erased. The wreckage rained down across a remote and rugged area of the Grand Canyon, making rescue and recovery almost impossible. Pieces of twisted metal were found miles apart, embedded in cliffs, scattered along narrow ledges, and buried deep within inaccessible terrain. Smoke rose briefly from the canyon, visible from afar, but by the time authorities understood what had happened, there was nothing left to save. The isolation of the crash site delayed recovery efforts for days, forcing search teams to hike through extreme heat, steep cliffs, and dangerous conditions just to reach the debris. As news of the disaster spread across the United States, shock turned into fear. The idea that two large passenger aircraft could collide in clear weather, without warning, shattered public confidence in air travel. Newspapers called it unimaginable, unthinkable, and unforgivable. Families waited desperately for confirmation, clinging to hope until the reality became undeniable. Entire households were wiped out. Children traveling with parents never reached their destinations. The canyon, once a symbol of natural beauty, became a graveyard of unanswered questions. Investigators faced an unprecedented challenge. With no flight data recorders, no cockpit voice recorders, and minimal radar information, reconstructing the final moments of the flights was painfully difficult. What they ultimately discovered was not a single dramatic mistake, but a chain of systemic failures. Air traffic control procedures were outdated, understaffed, and overwhelmed by the rapid growth of aviation. Pilots were operating under rules that assumed wide separation without providing tools to ensure it. The sky had become too busy for the technology of the time, and no one had fully acknowledged the risk. The Grand Canyon mid-air collision became a turning point in aviation history. Public outrage forced immediate action at the highest levels of government. The disaster directly led to the creation of the Federal Aviation Agency, later renamed the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA). Billions of dollars were invested in radar coverage, standardized flight corridors, altitude separation rules, and centralized air traffic control systems. New technologies were developed to track aircraft continuously, communicate more clearly, and prevent collisions before pilots could even see the danger. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this tragedy is that it occurred in perfect weather, without mechanical failure, terrorism, or extreme conditions. It was a collision born entirely from human systems that had not kept pace with human ambition. The lesson was brutal but necessary. The sky is not infinite, and safety cannot rely on trust alone. Every modern safety system, every radar screen, every automated warning that protects passengers today carries the legacy of those lost above the Grand Canyon. Even decades later, the crash remains one of the deadliest mid-air collisions in aviation history, not only because of the number of lives lost, but because of what it revealed. It exposed the fragile illusion that progress automatically brings safety. It showed that without foresight, coordination, and accountability, even the most advanced machines can become instruments of disaster. The silence that followed the collision was more than the absence of engines. It was the moment the world realized that aviation had reached a crossroads. Today, when aircraft pass safely above the Grand Canyon, passengers admire the same breathtaking view, unaware of the invisible systems guiding them, protecting them, and keeping them apart. Few know that beneath their wings lies the legacy of a tragedy that changed the sky forever. The worst mid-air crash in aviation history was not just a collision of planes. It was a collision between old rules and a new world, and the cost of that collision was written in lives. And as long as humans continue to chase the skies, the story of June 30, 1956, remains a reminder etched into aviation history. The sky may be vast, but responsibility must always be greater.